Well, hello and welcome everybody to International Women's Day. On this day, we're lucky enough to have one of our tutors, Jane George, who's going to tell us a little bit more about her and some of the courses that she runs which focus on women's place in history. So welcome, Jane. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you very much, Vicky. Nice to be here.
So Jane, could you just start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and what led you to come to be one of the tutors for the adult education programme with a particular interest in women's history?
Well, yes, I'm Jane, and I was born in Motherwell in Lanarkshire, grew up in the Borders, but came to Edinburgh at the end of the 1950s and went to school here. Didn't do all that well at school, couldn't wait to get away in fact, and didn't really do much in the way of education until I was in my 40s and I decided I'd like to go to university.
Ooh.
So I did the very first, I think it was, access course from Edinburgh University and Stevenson College, and managed to get in to university in 1989, I think it was. And then I kept thinking, when are they going to find me out? But they didn't seem to find me out at all. So I managed to get through my course. I did Scottish ethnology at the School of Scottish Studies. Had some great experiences there. Lecturers were super and really enjoyed my time at uni. And then I met one of my tutors from the access course who said, would you like to do some teaching? And I said, but I couldn't possibly do that. And she said, yes, I think you could. I need somebody to do social history.
Okay.
So I thought, right, okay, go for it.
Yes.
So I started teaching social history in adult education at Edinburgh Uni.
Lovely.
And then I kept meeting people who offered me work, more work.
Yes.
So then I went on actually to do a PhD after that, which took me for years.
Yes.
Too long. But anyway, I did that.
That's a lot of big commitment, isn't it? A PhD.
But I got another job out of it.
Right.
At Stirling University.
Okay.
So that supposed to last 2 years as a research assistant, but in actual fact it lasted 13 years.
Right, okay.
When my boss retired and he said, right Jane, just you carry on and teach my courses in sports history. I thought, right, okay.
Okay. Yeah, why
so
not?
That's how I managed to get jobs. I think people just saying, you can do it.
It was a case of you were working there in the environment and it was your experience, and obviously you had lots of potential, so they thought, well, that's a really interesting story. I didn't know all of that, so thank you for sharing that. So Jane, could you tell us a little bit about some of the courses that you run that focus on women's history and place in society in particular?
Yep. I came to Southbridge in 2011 and I started one course which was just Scottish women's history, but I thought, it'd be interesting to specialise a little bit more. So the first one I did was inspirational women.
Yes.
And we looked at explorers, religious women, scientists, politicians. So I thought I'd give you an example of one of our politicians.
Yes.
And this was Catherine, Duchess of Atholl, who was in fact a Conservative MP for Kinross and West Perth.
Right.
And she was the first Scotswoman to be elected to the Commons in 1923.
Right.
And one of her contributions was really a successful private members' bill in 1929 granted unwed mothers in Scotland the same financial assistance as those available to women in England and Wales. Right. And she really considered that this was important. In fact, she thought that motherhood was the most important role for women, despite the fact that she had no children of her own.
Okay.
And then she became embroiled in the Spanish question over the support of victims of the Spanish Civil War in 1936. And the victims, of course, were women and children.
Yeah.
So Catherine, in fact, visited Spain with another MP, a Labour MP, Ellen Wilkinson, and she was appalled by the conditions there and the plight of the refugee children that she helped arrange an evacuation to Britain of about 4,000 Basque children.
Right.
So
Wonderful.
she was a kind of maverick, you
Yes.
could say.
Yes.
Because in fact the Aid for Spain campaign in Scotland, it inspired women of all different backgrounds to help. But Catherine was dubbed the Red Duchess
Right.
because of her support for this kind of outwardly left-wing movement.
Yes.
And then she resigned her seat in 1938, opposition to Neville Chamberlain's policy of appeasement.
So that's interesting. So she was a Tory MP, but was dubbed as
left-wing leanings.
Yeah, okay, because she was a bit radical, and
Yes,
possibly because she was a. And do you think that was because she was a woman as well?
Possibly, yes. I just think she was a one-off. I don't think there's many would have been many like her.
Yeah.
And there were very few women in Parliament anyway. So, yeah.
Well, that's really interesting. Yes, that's certainly a long time ago, and not a name I've certainly heard of. So, and do you find that sometimes women haven't been, as place in history has not been written?
Absolutely. I think this is the whole sort of crux of the thing, is that really until the 1980s there was very little written histories of women, and it's really only since then that we've got a lot more. And of course with the development of courses and things, more people get to know about them.
Good.
So.
Well, you're spreading the word, certainly with the adult education programme and our very popular courses. So Jane, could you tell us about another one of your courses, please, and somebody else you might like to share with us?
Well, another of the courses is probably the most recent one I've done, Women in the Workplace, and I look at women in trade and industry and in the service sector. And one of the women I thought I'd tell you about is Kate Cranston. Now, she was born in her father's hotel in Glasgow in 1849, and in fact her family ran a chain of temperance hotels which provided visitors with first-class accommodation in an alcohol-free environment. And they opened hotels in Glasgow, Edinburgh and London. And Kate, as she came to be known, had, you could say, business blood in her veins. She didn't want the respectable life of a married woman at that point, as she valued her independence. So she became a tea room entrepreneur. And in 1886, she opened the Crown Luncheon Rooms in Ingram Street, Glasgow. And then in 1897, she opened you could say was part of her chain by this time, the world famous Willow Tea Rooms. So, she in fact employed Charles Rennie Mackintosh to design the tea rooms, so they became very well known. And she was considered a fair employer, although she could be rather demanding. She cared for the welfare of her staff in a rather, you could say, paternalistic, domineering fashion, which was of course characteristic of the period.
Yes.
She grew it up in, but interestingly, she employed girls who were usually orphans or from one-parent families. So in fact, you could say she was providing a social service.
Yeah, absolutely.
So an interesting woman, I think.
Yes. So very somebody who's seeing things in the sort of bigger picture, a bit able to see people not just as means of employees. They were people, and she was probably trying to help them in those early days.
Indeed,
so that's fantastic. What course is that?
That's from Women in the Workplace.
Women in the Workplace. Okay.
She was a boss as opposed to an employee,
absolutely,
but it was important.
Absolutely.
To give other women the opportunity of being waitresses and helping out, in that sort of environment. So.
Okay, that's fantastic. Well, maybe we'll post some information along with this video with some links to some of the women that you're mentioning. So, Jane, I think you've got finally one more to tell us about?
More. The course I'm teaching at the moment, in fact, Women with Vision.
Yes.
And that's really about some of the early medical students that tried to get into university at the end of the 19th century. And also about performers in the arts, singers, writers, etc. And also women in law and order, some of the first legal minds that had quite a battle to get anywhere.
Yes.
And social reformers and also journalists. And one of the women I thought I'd tell you about is one of the social reformers, Catherine Blair, who in fact, she married an East Lothian farmer, but during World War I, she harboured suffragettes who had been released from prison. These were the ones that had been on hunger strike.
Okay.
And although Catherine herself was a suffragist as opposed to a suffragette, she believed in democracy and equality. And she also started regular meetings for country women in Long Niddry to give them, you could say, confidence in public speaking and their creativity.
Yes.
And this actually became the Scottish Women's Rural Institute in 1917.
Right.
And in fact, she'd heard about institutes like this in Canada. Women in the prairies had started these type of institutes. So she thought, we'll start one in Scotland. So in fact, part of what she did was the women were able to go there and meet and talk, but they also were able to paint pottery. And the MacMerry pottery, which is very collectible today, became quite significant in their lives. And what I like about Catherine is her motto was, if you know a good thing, pass it on.
Yes.
So I think all of these women are the sort of women you want to hear about, and you will hear about it on my courses.
Yes.
And I feel that because of International Women's Day, it's also important to think about women in the past, because it helps you understand more what women in the present are going through.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Oh, that's fascinating, Jane. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. I've always wanted to attend one of your courses myself, but I've just never got round to it. But I certainly will. And for yourself, will you be doing anything for International Women's Day? Will you be celebrating in any particular way, or?
Well, just raising a glass to, in fact, some of these very brave women who are going through such a lot of turmoil at the moment in Ukraine. And I think our thoughts are with them more than anyone else, really.
Absolutely, no. Certainly our thoughts are definitely with women all over the world, but particularly at this time, Okay, well, thank you very much, Jane. That's been fascinating. And if anybody wants any more information, they can contact us and we'll put you in touch with Jane. Okay,
Great.
thank
Thank
you.
you, Vicky.
Bye.